This afternoon we'll continue with our discussion on biosecurity within the feed industry. And so today, Leah Wilkinson, who is the Vice President, Public Policy and Education with the AFIA, or the American Feed Industry Association, is joining us. She is the Vice President of Public Policy and Education. Leah joined AFIA in 2010. She interacts with state legislators, feed regulatory agencies in the Western U.S., and the Association of American Feed Control Officials and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She also works with the AFIA Feed Regulatory and Ingredient Approval and Definitions Committees. She grew up on a swine farm in Minnesota, and as a graduate in swine production from the University of Minnesota. She is very familiar with animal agriculture. She has also worked for the National Pork Producer Council and National Cattlemen's Beef Association, both in Washington, D.C. Before joining AFIA, Wilkinson served as Director of Policy and Industry Regulations for Viagen Incorporated in Texas. She holds a bachelor degree in animal science and plant systems from the University of Minnesota. Please welcome Leah Wilkinson.
Thank you very much. All right, good afternoon, all. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present on behalf of the U.S. feed industry and the American Feed Industry Association. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, very good. And to add to I grew up in southern Minnesota, but I do have a niece that's here. She's going to be a senior at Iowa State and in swine nutrition. So I wanted to be the first Dr. Becker. It's my maiden name. She's racing one of my other nephews who's at Minnesota in the Vet Fast program. So they're going to go parallel and see who can be the first Dr. Becker. But we appreciate you taking good care of her here at Iowa State. So I was asked here today to talk to you about the U.S. feed industry's perspective and how we've been partnering with the U.S. pork industry on African swine fever. And it really started back in the porcine epidemic diarrheal virus outbreak, and the realization and the role that feed can play either in the potential of an introduction of viruses and in the spread and transmission of viruses in between farms. And so a little bit about AFIA. We're a trade association, so we represent 680 member companies across the entire feed industry. So that's everything from the equipment that is used in our feed mills and ingredient manufacturing facilities, all the way through the ingredient suppliers, the feed manufacturers, and then we also have pet food manufacturers that are in our membership as well. We represent them on legislative and regulatory issues in Washington, D.C., and in all 50 states, because feed is regulated on a state basis as well. And then we hold networking conferences like you're at here today, and educational sessions for our membership. So we're a trade association, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of those members and trying to guide them in what we can do to help the industry be prepared to prevent an outbreak, but also in the case of an outbreak. Let's see. All right. You've already heard this from a couple other folks. I wanted to throw it up there and keep it up there because what I wanted to add in is the 2019. Nobody's really talked about what happened with the National Pork Producers Council canceling World Pork Expo, right? I mean, that was a big move for that association to cancel World Pork Expo, one of their main fundraising endeavors. And it hit home to me as a pork producer. My family still raised pigs in southern Minnesota. I used to work for NPPC, so I know how much that means to them. And it really hit home when I had one of the staff that I work closely with tell me, she said, Leah, she said, you know, we're talking about negligible risk, right? Things that we want to get it down either to a negligible risk or we think are negligible risk items. But to our producers, it's about zero risk. And what can we do to get to zero risk? And she said canceling World Pork Expo was getting to zero risk. So that hit home to me, and really as I then conveyed to our board, to our other staff members, it's like, this is where the industry's coming from. And that was very helpful to be able to have that conversation. So you've seen this a couple different ways as well, but there are multiple ways that the viruses can be spread, and this is specifically for African swine fever. All right, we know about the potential role of garbage feeding and swill feeding being one. You've got contaminated vehicles, you've got contaminated people, movements of pigs, but we've also got the whole issue of contaminated feed. That was the first time that we've had our U.S. government put that up there. And so our industry is a partner with the pork industry on this to do what we can to prevent any introduction of viruses where we can, and putting into place sound practices that actually have impact and provide protection for the pork industry, but then also this is broader than just African swine fever as well. And that came into play when, after the PEDV outbreaks, and Dr. Scott D. and the research that he started to do to look at the potential of how the virus got here in the first place. And you've all likely seen this paper. It's been published and talked about in many different forums. But in case you haven't, so these are the ingredients that Dr. D and his colleagues looked at. And they pulled those from the most common ingredients that were imported from China at the time. Okay? Part of our issue with the way the harmonized tariff code system is, we don't know if these are all imported for animal feed or if they're for human food uses or dietary supplements. Okay, so that's one of the challenges we have with being able to quantify the amount of ingredients coming into the United States for the use in animal feed. But he pulled these items because they are most prominent, and they could be items that could be used in animal feed. So we know you've got dry dog food. There are salvaged pet food that is used in the pork industry. Very unlikely that it's being imported from China to be fed because we have enough of our own U.S. pet food manufacturers that could be the supply of that. But there is dog food or pet food that is coming in. The issue I'll say with with any of the pet food ones is we don't know if it is treats or if it is kibbled product or canned product. The way they are, again, it's very generic. So you can't just assume that it is kibbled product coming in because it could be the chicken jerky treats, for example, that you may have heard about so much from China. So again, you've got everything from soybean meal, soy cake, DDGs, getting into some of the amino acids and vitamins. And then across the top, you've got different viruses, some of them being surrogates for foreign animal diseases since they were limited in the capacity of the laboratory that they were using, so they had to use surrogates instead of the specific foreign animal disease. And then anything that is in red is where the virus survived this transboundary mocked up system of shipment of those ingredients. So they contaminated those ingredients, put them in a laboratory, and then sat them for the time that it would be in a humidity and to see if the virus would survive. And so this first column here is Seneca Valley virus, and then you've got the second column being African swine fever virus. So there is quite a bit of red in those two columns, but then, it's trying to understand why are some, why is it negative here for soybean meal, organic for Seneca Valley virus, but it's positive for African swine fever. So there's still a lot of unknowns about this data, but this data spurred our industry into action. Okay, what could we do knowing that the likelihood, if contaminated, that it could survive shipment, right? So what can we as an industry do to help prevent that, to demonstrate for you all that if contamination isn't occurring, that you feel confident that it's not occurring. So our association put together a multi-part action plan. We did that last August. Some of these things are still being worked on today, but we continue to try to find what else is necessary or needed from the industry to move forward. So the first thing we really worked on was being that expert voice and being able to communicate with the pork industry why we have to import certain ingredients. There were calls to prohibit the importation from countries that had positive African swine fever virus. Well, that's not possible for if we want to be able to provide you with balanced rations, because there are certain vitamins that we can only get from China. Okay, so that was one of the first things that we said. We're like, whoa, hold on, we can't do that because, and once we explain that, they're okay, now what can we do to best understand how those ingredients are manufactured, how the supply chain works, what's the likelihood or unlikelihood of contamination, both ways. I said if I could take everybody over to China and show them how vitamins and amino acids were manufactured, I would have done that right away. But we knew that wasn't possible, and so we've tried to be able to convey that either from the industry through me back to the pork industry, or if you've got questions and I can't answer it, I will put you in touch with the industry expert so you can have that conversation one-on-one. There's been also calls for different mitigations. So what could we add to our feed that would kill the virus or reduce the viral load? So different mitigants, either adding feed additives, holding times, temperature requirements, all of those things were things that were thrown at the industry, coming up via communications from producers, crosswise across the industry, and even top-down within our own feed companies. They were wanting to do whatever they could to satisfy and show that they were doing something to prevent the introduction of viruses. So we've worked a lot on that, and I've got a few slides to talk through some of those specifics. Part of that is research. So there has not been a lot of research specific on African swine fever. It's picked up in the last couple of years. And so we wanted to be able to help fund and fill in some of those research gaps where it made the most sense for our industry. So we've helped fund some research on the holding times. And we're looking at other opportunities in some feed mill decontamination studies, some testing studies. And if there are others that want to approach us with some research that they see needs on, we're happy to filter that through our public charity, which is iFeeder. It's the Institute for Feed Education and Research. And we appreciate our industry stepping up to help fund those through our public charity. AFIA had released a biosecurity guide. We had initially put it together after 2001 with the bioterrorism actions. We updated it after PEDV to introduce the whole topic of biosecurity for transmission of diseases and viruses. And we updated that last fall and re-released that in January of 2019. And then we continue to work with the pork industry organizations, and now we're talking to the other species groups as well. And then I will also add our international partners. So we have sister organizations in the feed world across the world, as well as our own the International Feed Industry Federation. So we're working jointly with them on this topic as well. So here's AFIA's biosecurity guide. How many of you all have your own feed manufacturing facilities on your farm? Okay, a couple. How many use, hopefully an AFIA member, to provide your feed? Okay, a couple there too. How many of you have heard about AFIA's biosecurity guides or similar guides? I know Kansas State has some. Has anybody else looked at these or put these in place on their operations? All right, if not, they're there for you to use. We want folks to use them. We see this as a living document. If there are practices that you have in place at your facility that we don't have highlighted in here, we want to hear about it so that we can add it and make that a best practice for the entire feed industry. So what's covered in these biosecurity guides is, how do you go about setting up a biosecurity program in your facility? And that covers everything from your movement of people into the movement of products within the mill. It talks about thoroughly evaluating your suppliers and verifying your suppliers. That's a requirement that we have through other regulations that are put in place on us as well, but it talks about it now in more of a biosecurity concept. Working with your shippers, so either incoming product or outgoing product. How do you best time your deliveries? Making sure you're going to the certain facilities based upon disease risk. And then training and working with your personnel to make sure that they're putting those best practices in place and how you deal with visitors. We heard that earlier today as well. So one of the items, as we've been working with the pork industry, there was some discussion about a biosecure facility. They were talking about if you supplied from a biosecure facility, then you didn't need to do X. Well, there was no definition of biosecure facility, so we took a shot at putting that together, and that's in this document. And it basically entails if you're a biosecure facility if you followed all of these items in our biosecurity guide. Okay, so if anybody's talking about a biosecure facility, you can look at this document to see what that really means. So these are up on our website. We've given them to, I know they're up on Kansas State's website. I think you guys have them now. So it's there for everybody. Please post it, use it. I know the pork organizations have it as well. So part of that ongoing discussion and talking about, remember I talked about being able to take you all to China, I would. The group came together at the University of Minnesota and wanted to talk about the vitamin supply chain. So a meeting was held the end of April, and it encompassed all the pork organizations. AFIA was there, and then we had several of our member companies that are either vitamin manufacturers, importers, and then premix suppliers. And the intent of the meeting was to get a better understanding across all the different bodies what that supply chain looks like, and if we could identify any potential risks for contamination across that supply chain. So the day-long meeting happened. There was agreement that the risk when we're talking about this specific category of ingredients was low, but there is some gaps that do exist, and so we're working on providing more background on those different areas and to see if there are measures that we could put in place to fill those gaps. And then using that meeting, all the attention at the beginning of the discussion when China broke was on vitamins and minerals. So what can we use from this meeting as a template to talk about some of the other ingredients that are being imported from China? And there will be a meeting in about 2 weeks that will, same format at the University of Minnesota, and it's going to focus on the soy imports. And so we'll get quantification of what's coming in on the soybean side, soybean meal side from China, and talk through this whole supply chain again there. So I wanted to highlight a few of the communications that have come out from the pork industry that we were working with them on. Back in August, again, I was hearing from members, I'm being sent this questionnaire, I'm being asked these questions, how do I answer them? What's the best way? Can we get some industry, everybody working together and have one set of questions, right? So one of the things, we have a gazillion people that come audit our facilities, and if we can standardize that, it makes life a little bit easier. The pork industry wanted the same thing. So what are the important questions that a producer should ask their feed supplier or their ingredient supplier, if they're an on-farm feed manufacturer themselves. What do they need to know? Who do they need to ask? And how can they have that best conversation? So we worked with the industry to walk through this chart. So, is the ingredient manufactured or packaged in a country with active virus transmission? Question number 1. If yes, move on. If no, it's going to be a low risk. So if yes, is the ingredient considered at risk for transporting virus? So go back to that Dr. D research and see where does it fall in that level of risk. Was it positive or not? If no, consider it a minor risk. If yes, are there any mitigation procedures that could be put into place? And this question right here is what will lead into my next slide, talking about holding times. Right now, we do not have any approved chemical additives that you can add to your feed. About all we could do is hold the product and get the viral degradation that time between time and temperature. And so if yes, you've got a moderate risk. If it's no, then you've got a heightened risk. And then what do you do based upon those? So if it's a heightened risk, then you question yourself, should I be using that ingredient? Are there alternate sources that maybe are not from a positive country? What could you do? But this way you would be informed in your discussion, and it would be an useful conversation between the producer and your feed manufacturer or ingredient supplier. So that was the intent of that questionnaire. There have been some expanded questionnaires that have come out since then, but this is the basis for the questions that we came up with. So as I said, that led into the conversation about what mitigations could be put in place. Back in October was the first release of any suggestion or option for holding times for certain ingredients. And this was recently updated in May based upon additional research that our foundation helped fund with the Swine Health Information Center, because that initial research was based off of 2 data points, right? And so we needed to be able to show that what we were doing was was working for you all, and so we needed some more research. And actually what the research showed was that the holding times decreased, and we were able to add in 3 different temperature ranges. So by holding it, we're going for a 99.99% viral degradation. And we looked at conventional soybean meal, DDGs, vitamin D, and lysine. Again, the first study did not have a time temperature or a temperature component to it. And so it was anything that was in bulk products. So thinking your soybean meal or DDGs here, were supposed to be held 286 days. And so you can see with even the 3 different temperature ranges for soybean meal, we were able to knock that down to 143 days to get that 99.99% viral degradation. The DDGs part was something that was not in the initial research, and I've questioned a few people to try to understand why is that one so high. 494 days seems a little bit out there for me as quite a big outlier. The discussion about soybean meal, it seems to really like soy products. Okay, the virus African Swine Fever does. And the best theory is the protein content. Surface area was another thing. So I've asked, then why are we having such a different time requirement between soybean meal and DDGs? So there should be some more research that we do on that to try to figure that one out. The thing I will say, so 4 degrees Celsius is, as they told me, a mild, what they tried to get at a normal winter, not last year, in the Midwest. And then you've got 15 degrees C, so about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and then 86 degrees Fahrenheit for the third one. The vitamin D and lysine, these numbers, when we're talking packaged product, the original requirement was for 86 days or 78 days of holding time. So those drop down at least by half for vitamin D, and lysine stayed the same. But then you've got quite a drop off here at the higher temperature. So we have folks in our industry that are voluntarily putting these holding times in place. They did it back off of those original temperatures and times that were done in October. It is not a government requirement in Canada. They have put in a requirement for an import permit, and based upon the type of product it is, they are requiring some time and temperature holding of certain ingredients in Canada. But they did not base their numbers off of this research or the initial research. So they're using different numbers as well. There has been work that's been done across North America, so US, Canada, Mexico. There was what they call a framework meeting that was held the end of April, early into May, up in Ottawa, and it brought together the three countries, both their governments and the industry, to talk about what is the framework that we need in order to protect our entire continent, because if one country gets it, then we're all at risk for potential trade restrictions based upon the movement of animals and goods and products across our borders. And so this was the outcome of that. There's 4 pillars to the framework: preparedness planning, enhanced biosecurity, which is where the feed discussion comes into play, ensuring business continuity, so compartmentalization was talked about a little bit earlier. There's also a feed component into this of you will still need feed in order to feed animals. We will have other species that we will need to be transporting feed to as well, and so how can we continue to either supply those farms and keep our feed mills up and running as well. And then coordinated risk communication. So those are the pillars that were established. Each country now is supposed to go back and develop what their specific framework would look like for those different areas. And I anticipate that those countries, that there'll be another meeting sometime in the fall or early winter to report back and then see where the continued coordination can be. So some of the next steps for feed and what we're working on. All these organizations, put them up there, and you'll see we've got our 2 government partners in there as well. We're working very closely. We're in close communication, and we're working on how can we evaluate the risk of the introduction of pathogens, and we've broadened it out to just more than African swine fever now via imported feed products. So we're looking at how can we identify and initiate any actions that can either be industry-led actions or potential government actions that would achieve this goal. And what we've said is they must be achievable, they must be based on science, and they have to minimize any trade disruptions. We live in a global world. In agriculture, we're dependent on being able to export, and we have to be able to import certain products, so we've got to be able to minimize trade disruptions. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those mitigation steps. So we already talked about the holding time and temperatures that's in place. I encourage you to have those discussions, find out from your suppliers if they are doing that, if they are importing ingredients. Feed additives. I get asked this question all the time. Well, let's just add a feed additive to our product, and it's being done in China. We heard that, and I've heard it from other people. We currently do not have any approved feed additives or ingredients for viral mitigation in the United States, okay? So if you ask your feed supplier or ingredient supplier to put in something based upon some research that you've heard, that feed manufacturer legally cannot add that ingredient for that intended use. Okay, we have some of the ones that are being researched have approved uses for other intended uses in the United States, but not for viral mitigation, okay? So that will be putting your feed manufacturer in a hard spot if you ask them to do that. And if they say no, that's why. Legally, they cannot add a feed ingredient that is not approved for that intended use in the United States. Where there's a lot of research that's being done, FDA has said that they will expedite the review of a package if it comes to them. They want to be able to say that they've done something, right? They want to be able to give a win to the industry. But you all should want there to be a government review of these ingredients, because you need to have that protection that what you're paying for actually works. Okay, that's what the government, so safety and efficacy, that's what the government approval process is for. Okay, and that's why it's there. That's why they're being sticklers on it, and that's why I continue to communicate to our members that we've got to get things through the process if we're going to be able to say that we're doing this. And the other thing I'll ask you to do is, if you haven't already talked to your suppliers, talk to them. Find out where they're importing ingredients from. If they're importing ingredients, do they need to source from that source? Are there other alternative sources? Know the risks, right, that could be there. So just be informed, have the conversation with your suppliers. And if you are an AFIA member and you don't know, we've got materials up on our members-only website. We've got other materials that are up on our public website. That's where the biosecurity guides are. They're free for everybody. So we've been trying to keep our members updated, and we've got different things that we've done in our journal, and any way we can. And I've learned, as I've been talking more about this in the last couple of months, that my poultry guys or my beef guys maybe weren't paying attention because I was only talking African swine fever. So we're going to start talking a little bit differently across our membership, so maybe I can get those guys in tune as well into their role into preventing diseases or viruses from being introduced in the United States. So that's what I have for you. Appreciate if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Eric.
Going over here.
Ready to catch?
Who's going to go first?
Leah?
Yes,
Yeah. One of your slides said feed ingredients coming from areas with active viral risk. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm thinking about my DDGs and my corn and my soybean meal all drive through active viral risk because we're in a pig dense area. We have PRRS, PED, influenza. Has there been research to see if any of those viruses are getting into complete feed that you know of?
So going back to, we know, let's see if I can go back. Where is it? So this column right here is PEDV. So it's again looking, the only ones it would be looking at would have been the processed soybean meal. Yeah, soy is not on there. So I don't know if anybody's looked at whole grains or is looking at whole grains. That's, as I've been talking with people and thinking about the mitigations we put in place, what happens if the virus gets here, has been one of the questions that I've asked too. So we are working more on the feed mill side to try to learn what can we do to decontaminate a mill. Some of those same pictures you saw about pulling up the cement slats, that's what we've been told we would have to completely take apart a feed mill in order to decontaminate a feed mill. And, I mean... My worry is all these ingredients dropped in the drive over to anything pulled off tires, just giving them in and falling in the grate. Yep, so the concern is about the transport and the movement of those and the trucks driving across the pits and so there are some protocols in the biosecurity guide. We're looking at it more too about how can we best protect that from happening. So it's an ongoing issue for us. Charlie.
Yeah, at what point does public health risk outweigh market forces to the point where we would consider some of those ingredients there, which we make in rather abundant quantities, especially soybean meal? At what point do we start considering we just should not bring ingredients of that type from places that have been documented to have ASF or the other viruses? I guess we're talking about ASF right now, but what's the trade-off there?
So that's part of the conversation that we're having with the entire industry and the government agencies as well, because whatever our government's founded on whatever we put in place has to be science-based, right? And so trying to answer the first question of the likelihood of contamination in those countries for those ingredients is one of those, which goes back to his question as well.
You've got it.
And then educating you all is the best that I can do, and others, as to what the risks are about those ingredients. And then, in the meantime, what can we as an industry do versus a government necessarily. And then that other added part in there about trade disruptions, I'll just point back to that too.
Okay.
So,
Anybody else? Questions?
all right. Well, if not, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to be in discussion anytime about the topic.